Serious. People who have lived on a supposedly haunted house, what was your scariest supernatural encounter? What was it like? I bought a house from the 1940s. The main floor had been renovated and was brand new, but the basement looked like it was updated in the 70s. My first day there, I was home alone showering, and the lights in my bathroom went out, and I heard someone say, "Hello?" I thought I just popped a breaker somehow as it's hard to hear in the shower. My bathroom had lights over the mirror and one on the ceiling. Each had its own light switch which were on separate walls, and I had both on. When I got out, I glanced at the light switch and it was flipped to off as was the other one. I thought it was weird, but just kept on with my day. I worked nights and was home alone during the day, but my ex and his two friends who lived in our basement were on a normal schedule. Roommate 1 only stayed there 2 months before moving out. He would wake up to his alarm going off at 3:15 a.m. every morning. Bought new alarm clocks, same thing happened. Used his phone as an alarm clock, same thing happened. His computer would turn itself on and off while he was sleeping, never while he was awake. His door opened inward and he would wake up to it open, so he put a box of books in front of it. Thinking it wasn't latching correctly, but he woke up to his door all the way open and the box of books down the hallway. His girlfriend would stay the night and say she felt someone touch her face or arms at night. My other roommate lived with me the entire time. He didn't believe what the rest of us were saying and shrugged it off. One night about a month in, he was mocking and making fun of the ghost with his girlfriend in his room. Suddenly his whole dresser fell over on top of his girlfriend. She started hearing whispering and feeling someone touch her whenever she slept over. He also said that once he went to get his guitar out of the downstairs living room and saw a man standing in the corner with his back to him. It was daytime and he thought it was a weird shadow because no one was supposed to be home. So he turned the light on and it disappeared. When he turned it back out the shadow was gone. But he heard someone behind him whispering something, so he ran upstairs. My ex heard whispering and saw shadows but nothing crazy. My dog wouldn't go in the basement and would growl at random corners. I had a few more experiences alone and with friends. I was sleeping one day and felt someone grab my hand and say, "Mommy? Wake up." Which I don't have kids. My stuff would go missing all the time. I had a pair of glasses which I set on my coffee table. I went into the kitchen and when I came back, they were gone. I was home alone and searched everywhere for months. I always sat in my office to do my makeup, same spot every single day. One day I was sitting there and just said, "My glasses would be super helpful right now, just give them back." I turned my head to pick up my phone, and when I looked back, they were sitting on a pile of blankets I needed to put away. I had friends over and was telling them about the ghost. They laughed it off and said they weren't real. I said, "Ask them yourself," so one of them says, "Is there really ghosts here?" Sarcastically. From behind the basement door, a female and male voice both said, "Yes." We were there alone, but he didn't believe me when I told him that. So they both went downstairs, came back up, looked into the rest of the house and immediately left. They wouldn't come back. The last thing I recall happening was when I was selling the house. I was touching up paint in the living room and hallway upstairs. As I was sitting by the basement door painting, I started to hear what sounded like a little girl humming. Then it started getting louder like it was coming up the stairs. By this point I lived alone, as my ex had moved out a few months before and my roommate had moved out since I was selling. I got scared and called a guy I had started seeing to come over. He had heard and seen things in the house too and immediately came over. Before he got there, I started recording it on my phone so I could show him. It sounded like she got 3/4 up the stairs and then it just stopped. I still have the recording. It's very hard to hear, mostly loud static noise, but you can make out faint humming. I have a few, but I feel like telling my sisters because it's the most physical one. I was probably 16 and she was probably 15. She woke me up in the middle of the night crying and begging to sleep in my room. This was unusual because I'm the butter robot that always begged her to sleep in my room, and she'd sometimes get mad that she wants to sleep on her own. Anyways, I say no because she refused to sleep in my room earlier and wanted to get back at her, but she keeps crying until I ask her why. While you read this part you'll probably think it's sleep paralysis, but wait until the end. She said she woke up and couldn't move. Something was super slowly pulling her off the bed. When she got to the edge where she should fall, she fell in slow motion. She said it was taking forever for her to hit the ground, but as soon as she did everything was in super speed. Right when she hit the ground, something was yanking her under the bed, but she was able to move then and kicked it off to run in my room. After she told me that I let her sleep in my room, then the next day we looked at her legs, and she had super dark purple bruises on her legs, like 4 perfect circles all the way around both of her legs. I lost my damn mind over this and asked if maybe the dog leashes wrapped around her legs while walking them, but they were perfectly symmetrical, and we only had one dog strong enough to leave bruises like that, and she was a sweet baby who would never. She said no, and she didn't have them the day before and can't think of anything that could have done it. I have quite a few. I find ghost, spirits, supernatural things very interesting. I feel like when you believe or spend any kind of time watching shows, reading book about, or even talking with people about these things, you're more susceptible to these things. I guess my first would have been in college. I had 4 roommates and we rented this really old 3-story house in the middle of town by the university. The kitchen had 3 doors leading in and out of it. The only light switch in the kitchen was on the one side of the kitchen that didn't have a doorway. Sometimes you'd turn the light off, make it to the doorway, and it'd flip back on. This could be chalked up to the switch not being flipped down far enough and slipping back up, I suppose. The 3rd story of this house was basically one big room with a little closet, almost like another tiny room to where you could fit 3 or 4 people in it, but the height of the closet was maybe 4 tall. There was a pool table up there, and we'd had a nice stereo system up there. One day I was home alone and bored, so I went upstairs to play some pool. As I was playing, I heard in a loud whisper, "Hey." I thought maybe someone had come home, so I went down throughout the house, and no one was home. I went back upstairs and started playing again when I heard, "Hey, late to get up." I freaked out, ran down both stories and left the house until one of my other roommates returned. The last interesting one at this house was when I was laying in bed one night. Everything in my room was off and it was pitch black in there. All of a sudden my printer turns on, not the computer, just the printer, and starts printing something. Freaked out and intrigued, I got up, turned on the light, and grabbed the piece of paper. In the top left-hand corner in a tiny size was a heart, maybe wingdings or something. In my head, I was just like, well, at least the ghost loves me. There were several times where one roommate's TV or stereo would be found to turn itself on while they weren't home, or the stereo upstairs would randomly come on with the volume on it increasing and decreasing on its own. Next would be a place where my husband and I lived with our first child. I always sat my purse on the rail at the top of the stairs. One day, it forcefully flew down the stairs and laid it about halfway down before rolling all the way down. Toys would roll back and forth across the carpeted living room floor. Our dog was always barking and staring at seemingly nothing. The next house we lived in was a 2-story home that was fairly decent in size. The master bedroom and bathroom were upstairs all by themselves, so that's where me and my husband's room was while the kids' rooms were downstairs. My kids and nieces always had a rule, theirs, not mine, that you have to go to sleep by midnight or else you would hear someone walking around upstairs most of the night. I never really believed them until one night I got off from work super late and didn't want to walk all the way upstairs. I opted for the couch. I heard what sounded like a child running around upstairs, so I went up to see what was going on, only to find my husband dead asleep, no lights or TV on. This happened almost every night apparently, but you would never hear it if you were upstairs. One early morning, probably around 5 or 6 in the morning, I was laying on the couch with my kids who were too little to be in school yet. As we were laying there, I heard what sounded like my big heavy dresser fall over upstairs. I mean, it was the kind of loud that made you jump, and it shook the house too. Terrified and not wanting to scare the kids any more than they already were, I suggested we just go back to sleep for a while. When we woke up several hours later and the kids were busy playing, I went upstairs to see what the damage was and dreading having to clean it up. When I went into my bedroom, everything was perfectly normal and in place. Sometimes my Siri would come on when my phone was sitting across the room and say, "I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that." My husband heard something growl into his ear from over his shoulder once. Don't really miss living in those places, needless to say. I grew up, 2004 to 2012, in a house both my mom and I are still sure was haunted. She had her own experiences, but I'll just mention mine. We noticed soon after moving in that things were weird. The power would flicker constantly, we would hear music, and things would move all the time. Nobody else on our street had any issues like this. I was home alone one day, and suddenly a roll of duct tape flew off the kitchen counter across through the hallway. I still have no idea how that could have happened. Another time, I lost my first ever phone. My mom and I searched for it for days, and I was getting in a lot of trouble for losing it since it was expensive. I remember one day pleading with any higher or lower power, God, devil, whatever, to find it. I turned around and it was right there on the oven top where I had just been standing beside, and we cooked dinner the night before. There was an attic door in my room, but it didn't freak me out much at the beginning. Then about a month after moving in, I was sitting in my room and it opened. On its own. I got my mom to check it out, but it was almost too heavy of a door for her to open. It couldn't have been wind or anything like that. She went up and the attic was empty. This happened twice more while living there. At night I would often see lights or shadows out of my peripheral vision, which wouldn't appear if I was looking at it. One night I saw a bright orb cross my room, getting brighter and brighter before disappearing entirely. The weirdest night was when I was home alone. I woke up suddenly really thirsty and went to the kitchen for a glass of water. I was drinking it with my back to the kitchen window. Late at night, with no wind or sound. Something slammed against it. I looked behind me and there was a hand mark on the window. I freaked out, dropping my glass and running into my room to hide under the covers. Maybe about 1 minute later, I started to feel something pat my head. It was slow and deliberate, lasting maybe a minute. I was too scared to open my eyes, and it eventually stopped. It wasn't malicious at all but still really weird.